All right, everybody, welcome back to Utopias for our second podcast after our great first podcast with Cornell West. I am so happy to welcome Andrew Yang for our second edition of Utopias. Many of you know who Andrew Yang is, but just in case you don't, I consider him a friend. I consider him someone who really cares deeply about many of the same issues that I do. I consider him a figure who is not about partisan politics at all, even though many of you know of him through his run about 4 years ago when he ran in the Democratic primary. He's all about repairing the breaks, the things that are broken in the United States, and also caring about everybody. And I think that's why, on a very personal level, I consider him a friend. He's someone I've been really happy to be in conversation with for the last few years, off and on. And just as a formal description of Andrew, he's an American businessman, attorney, lobbyist, and politician. He was a candidate in 2020 for the Democratic Party presidential primaries, and actually in 2021 for the New York City Democratic mayoral primary. And he's the co-chair of the Forward Party alongside former New Jersey Governor Christine Whitman. The son of Taiwanese immigrants, Andrew was born and raised in New York State. And his signature policy when he ran for president was the universal basic income of $1,000 a month as a response to job displacement that is created through artificial intelligence, big tech, and of course, automation. In this conversation, we go through a lot of issues, including why he started this party. And I was actually quite impressed to hear that he didn't create a new party out of a desire to sort of just create a new party or take power. He did it as a mechanism to try to solve particular issues that are being blocked by the duopoly, mainly these two elite parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So, in particular, we talk about things like the child tax credit, paid family leave, and he's trying to solve these problems and overcome these structural barriers. That's his real focus. And Andrew also makes it clear in our interview that no matter what, he wants to ensure that Donald Trump is not going to be reelected. But he also explains why he's not supportive of the current president as the best avenue of doing so. But there's a lot of laughs, a lot of inspiration, a lot of discussion about technology, where we're headed. How do we put humanity first and foremost in front of technology? How do we ensure that democratic interests, even environmental interests, are what really matter? And we talk a lot about a bunch of other ideas that might make the digital economy more equitable, more fair, more compassionate. And then we kind of riff on a bunch of topics that are pretty fun. Growing up Asian American, as we both did, our experience writing books. And of course, we talk a lot about 80s music and our shared love of 80s music. So, again, please enjoy this episode, special episode here on Utopias, stories of those who care and repair. Welcoming Andrew Yang to Utopias today. Andrew, I'm so grateful to be in conversation with you. It's been a little while since we last were in touch, but I found the few times that we've connected real time in person and online to have it be really inspiring. I think of you as a voice of compassion, a voice of care. You care a lot about this country. You care, I think, more widely about the direction this country is heading in, the directions technologies are taking us. And I think you think a lot about the global questions as well. So thank you for joining Utopias. Really appreciate you as a person, first and foremost, and as a public figure and a leader.
Oh, thank you, Ramesh. I learn anytime you and I spend time together too. And congrats on trying to help people visualize a brighter future, because I know there's a lot of dystopian stuff out there. Not for no good reason, honestly. I'm grateful to you for trying to paint a brighter picture.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of care that exists in our country, that exists in the world. And I think more and more we are sort of being taken away from those sorts of capacities we have as human beings because of forces that are overwhelming to us in many different directions, whether they're political, psychological, technological, economic precarity, all of these, the climactic challenges, and so on. So it's interesting to see how challenges can be the basis of a renewed inspiration toward creativity and care. And that's really what this is all about, I hope.
Yeah, I love it. And eager to join you in trying to point out some of the more optimistic possibilities.
Yeah, and this is where I really want us to go today. And in general, I just want to keep working with you on making those sorts of changes happen in my own
Amen.
limited
Amen,
way.
brother. Oh no, limit. I mean, yeah, you're better than just about anyone.
Sweet.
Because for those of you who don't know, but I mean, Ramesh has done work in this direction, and when I was trying to make good things happen, Ramesh was there for me.
Thank you. Appreciate you. I want to start by asking you a little bit about your own youth growing up, in the US, some of your inspirations, some of your heroes, who you looked up to, who you look up to now. Where do you draw inspiration right now, growing up, and how we got to the place that we're at today? Obviously, that's a much longer story, but most importantly, where are you drawing inspiration from, and where did you in the past?
I've been thinking more about this as I've gotten a little older, because I thought of myself as young for most of my life, and then at a certain point, it's probably not an accurate self-description. So, but I thought of myself as young because I'd skipped a grade. I skipped kindergarten, so there's always a joke about how I never learned to share. I never learned to do all these very important things you learn in kindergarten. Graduated from high school when I was 17. Graduated from college when I was 21. So I was young my whole life, and I was trying to get things done. I grew up in the 80s primarily, and I listen to 80s music now, and I just think to myself, like, were things happier back then? It was in my imagination. Certainly I still listen to the music because I find the music to be like, but I'm not sure if it's because I was a kid then and it just harkens back to a simpler time. I recently watched this "We Are the World" documentary on Netflix, which, if you, I don't know if you saw it, Ramesh, but it also brought me back because I remember when that song came out and thinking about these artists and the culture then. But my role models, certainly my parents, as immigrants, so just how hard they worked and how much they sacrificed for me and my brother. But I grew up one of the only Asian kids in my town, and so I was subject to some things that were not so nice, but I still fundamentally felt like America is comprised of good people, very fortunate to be born here. And that experience bore out when I ran for president and traveled the country. So when you ask what uplifts me or inspires me today, it's meeting good people. And if you have your eyes and ears open and you go out into the world, you'll see that there are a lot of amazing people doing great things.
I was just bumping some 80s music last night, like 80s new wave. I was kind of going between Depeche Mode, New Order, The Cure, and then I went into like a little hip hop zone here at my place.
Dude, that's something that keeps me upbeat. But last year, Ramesh,
Ah,
I saw both Depeche Mode and The Cure in concert. So they both
what?
still tour, and they're both still phenomenal.
Did you see them back in the day at all?
I did, yeah. Depeche Mode was the first concert I ever saw in 1989, the Violator tour. I was 14.
Ooh,
So those of you guys
that
want
was
to
a
do some
great
math.
record.
Yeah,
Great
but it was
record.
great. I went there. I had this tattered DM shirt that was really poorly made because it kind of disintegrated.
Like Disintegration, another one of their
Well,
records.
there was a disintegration, and I saw the Cure in concert. I loved concerts growing up, and I look at my boys now. I've got two boys who are 11 and 8, and I don't think music's going to play as important a role for them, but it might. I mean, who knows? Like I actually now expose them to the bands from my youth, just because I think maybe later they'll be like, oh, my dad liked this band.
Well, this podcast is definitely my goal is to bring on really interesting musicians and artists and even jazz musicians, monks, all types, just people who are looking forward, really, which is the name of the political party that you started. And so I guess I want to just ask you about your ascendance into becoming a public figure, running for president. You had a lot of following from younger folks. Both our producers, Anastasia and Phoebe, told me how much they loved you during the 2020 campaign. Many still follow you today. You really tapped into something, well, I would say a very significant emerging demographic in the US, which is not simply demographically located, but more people who are looking at changes that are occurring, looking for real solutions, youth cultures, very diverse, the constituencies. In fact, when I was working Bernie, as you know, I was a surrogate and doing policy. One of my jobs was to try to peel away Yank voters. I don't know if I ever told you that, man. But anyway.
Well, it makes sense they would send you, Ramesh. Yeah, super grateful that folks like Phoebe and Anastasia and young people on campuses around the country were inspired or affected at all by my campaign. I do run into young people all the time. I'll give you an example. Like I was on the street in New York City in Koreatown the other day, and then some people freaked out when they saw me, and we're just like, "Oh my God, you're Andrew Yang." I was like, "Yeah, sure." And they're like, "But what happened was they were on campus during 2020." And then they graduated, moved to New York, and then running into me for them was like this very happy occurrence. And hearing that, meeting folks like that, it's awesome to me because, again, like I remember when I was young, just imagining like having a figure I was excited about. I like to believe I was campaigning on things that young people saw as important for them and their futures. Certainly things around AI and UBI and other things that we managed to inject into the mainstream in a way that I don't think it would have happened otherwise. You know, when I started the campaign, 27% of Americans thought UBI was a good idea. And now it's something like 65%. And I dare say that that is going to become more and more prevalent and prescient as time goes on.
And was your decision to run for president and to stay active, like in the kind of public eye in the political world, what was behind that decision for you, and what is behind your desire to continue to be sort of in the public eye and in the political realm?
So the big left turn in my career, Ramesh, is that I left the private sector to start a nonprofit called Venture for America in 2011, and that was a significant move and shift. And so I was like a wholesome entrepreneur mentor for years and years. And then the decision to run for president was an extension of that. Really, is that okay? If I was genuinely advocating for or fighting for this positive economy. And I thought that AI was going to come and all these changes were happening and Trump was an early sign of it. Then the most honest thing I could do would be to try and make a case at a national level and do something rash, like run for president. And one of the things that warmed my heart was that I was running for president and campaigning around, and a person who I knew from social entrepreneurship circles came to me and said, "You know, Andrew, like you're a role model that like you just took it to the next level." And I was like, "I'm so glad you see that," because it was driven by my desire to solve problems and make the world a better place. And then after the presidential campaign, there was still enough energy around me and resources that it really would have been a massive shame, honestly, if I were just be like, "Okay, guys, I'm out now." You know, like it would have, it would have been a not smart or good thing for me to have done. And 99% of the stuff I get out in the world is very positive if I just walk the street. And so it's been very natural for me to keep going, but incredibly grateful to folks who have made that the case. And also, I count my blessings all the time because I know a lot of do gooders who burn out in various ways or just have a hard time supporting their family. And I get that acutely as someone who started and ran a nonprofit, as someone who's been a political candidate. It's hard to make money in these pursuits. And I'm just so grateful that I've been able to do this work and still be, frankly, like a responsible husband and father.
I mean, I think it's remarkable. And I want everybody who's listening or viewing this to also note that your campaign in 2020, despite never being backed by the Democratic Party machine, lasted longer and, in a certain sense, continues on today through, the things you advocate for, the way you struck a chord with so many of us. And in my case, even though I was working for Bernie and I really love him, there was so much love that I had and appreciation for the issues you were bringing up, and then your approach toward people. Like you were really not trying to attack others. You were always trying to stay issue focused. You're also like, hey, let me speak to, when you're in this Democratic Party machine. And I think that there's a lot of appreciation that I personally, and I know many of us have for you because of the person you are as well.
Well, thank you. I'm just so glad that shone through in some way. I want to share some of what I've been working on since, because most people don't realize. So I started an organization called Humanity Forward in Washington, D.C. that lobbies for anti-poverty measures like an enhanced child tax credit that just got out of the House, and nothing gets out of the House nowadays, but it just got out of the House 4 weeks ago. It would lift 400,000 kids out of poverty. It would reduce poverty for about 10 million. And unfortunately, a Republican senator said, hey, we don't want to deliver a win for President Biden before the election. So we're not sure what's going to happen in the Senate. But we've been grinding away there for things that reduce poverty as, frankly, like, a stepping stone towards something like a UBI. And then I've been working on political reform measures via Forward Party that would hold the stranglehold, really, that special interests and extremists have over our political parties. Things like ranked choice voting and nonpartisan primaries, in my opinion, would lead directly to something like campaign finance reform. And so those are the things I'm still working on that I'm proud of. But Humanity Forward, what's interesting, Ramesh, is that it doesn't get a lot of attention because the really effective organizations in DC, in my opinion, don't pound their chest that much, because if you're out there attacking, for example, someone who's against certain legislation, the odds of it getting done go down, not up. And so, unfortunately, the perverse incentive structure we have in DC is for organizations to say, "Oh, look how hard we're fighting," and it's like, you do realize that by lambasting that person, the odds of legislation like slip away. And so the work that Humanity Forward's been doing often never makes a headline, but the fact that this enhanced child tax credit made it out of the House is like a multi-year achievement. And if it gets out of the Senate, it would be the second biggest thing I've done in my career, because who can say that they helped reduce poverty for hundreds of thousands?
And this was, of course, something that was instituted during the pandemic temporarily. Am I not correct about that? There was
Yeah, the more robust version of the enhanced child tax credit reduced child poverty by about 3 million.
right.
And we should have kept doing that, obviously. And then it fell prey to DC dysfunction in 22. And so the fact that we were able to revive some portion of it, on one level, is incredibly frustrating, because we obviously should have kept the whole thing and even built on it. And 120 economists signed a letter saying this is the best thing we've done to reduce poverty in a generation or more. I get aggravated thinking about it, because you reduce child poverty from, broadly speaking, it was something like 11%. You reduced it to 4 or 5%. And so we should have been crowing in the streets. Like, we freaking did it. And then we unfortunately thrust those kids back into poverty. And then the poverty rate shot back up to 10 or 11%. So super pissed off, but we can bring it back. That's something that a better political system would have delivered.
Yeah, and I think that the thing, I know I've spoken with you about this before, is there are actually such important kind of low-hanging fruit issues that are actually popular for Americans. Like, the American people find, child tax credit resoundingly popular, UBI resoundingly popular, some sort of like real effective gun control resoundingly popular, like an assault weapons ban, like just in so many different themes. So if you were actually just sort of say, what is 70, even 75%, or let's say something like that, of Americans agree upon, it would actually be a broad legislative agenda that could actually refresh our democracy and take it back.
I mean, most of us would be blown away by everything that we could accomplish if we adopted even that 75% threshold you're talking about, Nimesh. And so this is the darkness, and I do not want to discourage people at all. But there was a study out of Princeton that tried to find the relationship between what Americans want and the policy outcomes, and they found there was no relationship. In other words, like 7% of us want it, 70% of us want it, 80%, like, doesn't matter. As one example, by the way, 80% of Americans hate the campaign finance system and would love to change it. And then it's like, are we going to get that? No. When you start embracing the fact that our political system actually does not respond to popular will, only then does it click in, when you're like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, so what do you respond to? Now, it turns out that the correlation between what the top 10% want and policy outcomes is very real and strong. So that starts to kind of
Surprise,
additionally get
surprise.
your wheels turning. So Humanity Forward is based on an Onion article I read maybe 18 years ago. And it said the American people hire their own lobbyist to fight for their agenda on Capitol Hill. And there's a guy in a suit who's like, now they'll take the American people seriously now that I'm on the case. And I thought that was hysterically funny, but also pretty freaking accurate. And so, believe it or not, Humanity Forward is paying lobbyists who go into congressional offices and be like, hey, poverty bad, you should work on that. And some of the congressional offices are like, who do you represent? like what's going on? Because they're totally unused to being lobbied for good things.
Yeah, wait a second. You actually represent the American people and their broader views. So telling, right? That there's some sort of, I mean, some of my friends at the Young Turks call it corruption, but that there's something in the middle. There are these intervening forces that actually displace what we wish for as Americans and reconstruct it in these sort of weird political parties that are themselves increasingly perverse and anti-democratic, in my opinion, and are trying to coronate particularly, octogenarian leaders. It's a very, very strange situation where that probably results in an increased connection, an increased sense that many Americans have that we don't really have power over our government. It's not really our democracy. And you kind of set that up on the backdrop of gross economic inequalities that are sort of connected to the directions technologies have taken. Three Americans with equivalent wealth to around 160 or so million people on a planetary level, 8 people or so with equivalent wealth to almost 4 billion, 8 to 4 billion, 3 to 165 approximately million. These are not caused by technology. These are not inherently caused by corruption per se, but there are certain kinds of forces that have turned us more and more into some sort of oligarchic, in my opinion, sort of system that makes many of the rest of us feel powerless, and especially younger folk. That was sort of me ranting, but I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that before I want to take you to a discussion of technology and its effects on all of us.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And one of the things I say is that technology will supercharge whatever economic dynamics are already in place. And so if you have rampant inequality and regulatory capture, and then you pour tech on it, then all of a sudden you wind up with even crazier results. Americans are getting more and more ticked off by it. Now, the question is, what do we do? And these political parties, these two political parties, are expert at taking whatever it is we want and then end up like diverting the energies in particular ways, and often just sending it like against each other. I mean, so by the numbers, and you all know I'm a math guy, about 10 billion plus is going to get spent on this election cycle, mostly on ads pitting us against each other. And then how much is going to get spent bringing us back together? How much of it's going to get spent trying to cure the system itself of these terrible perverse incentives? Like a sliver of a sliver of a sliver. Like we're all increasingly subject to these parties that don't have our interests at heart.
So really to then the larger sort of forces that are sort of driving much of this, or just sort of like almost the foundation of our lives these days, is so many aspects of our lives are, what some might call datafied or technologized or
Yeah.
mediated by digital technologies, by computational systems that calculate, correlate, order, prioritize, algorithmize, in the sense that, we all get piped different sort of opportunities or lack thereof, whether it's what we see on our social media feeds, or whether it's when we put an insurance application online and there's a decision made on how much it should cost, healthcare, etc. So life increasingly is being expressed through numbers and data, and perhaps an issue associated with all this is, you, Andrew Yang, myself, Ramesh Srinivasan, others, we don't really know what the data about us that are being gathered, by whom, how long such is being retained for, and even how such data are being aggregated. My favorite sort of cheesy example that I always tell my students is, okay, fair enough that the wider world knows how I present myself on Instagram, which I don't really have, because they know, or on Twitter or what have you. But I wonder if that data should be combined with data about me going to 7-Eleven after midnight and buying, a bunch of hot dogs and 40s, which I don't do. But, it's sort of like, what happens when these parts of ourselves are being surveilled and captured by third-party forces, whether they're corporate forces or state forces or the cozy marriage between the two. So what is going on here? How do we return this sort of technologization of our lives in this nation around the planet to something more democratic? What do we need to do? I know it's a massive question.
Yeah, I think the lowest hanging fruit in this arena is data rights and data ownership. When I was running and saying like, "Hey guys, you do know that our data is getting collectively sold and resold for hundreds of billions of dollars a year. How much are you seeing of that?" Then people are like, laugh, but it's like, no, really, like how much are you seeing? I try and spell out that if AI does the work of the 2 million Americans who work in call centers right now, what does that mean? What does that even mean for tax revenue? Because these tech companies often aren't paying meaningful taxes on what AI can do. And again, that AI is built upon data that is harvested from all of us. The EU has taken some steps in this direction. California as a state has taken some steps in this direction. But if you can reverse that power imbalance, where right now it really is like we're rats in a maze and the tech companies measure and capture and stimulate and do these things. But if you were to flip the tables on them and be like, okay, now everyone, our data is ours. What you do with it, we have to know about. We have to agree to it. We can change it. We can pull out of the system if we want. We can get paid for it. And then most Americans would be super pumped about a version of this reality. And then if we become lords of our own data use and treatment, then we can actually make choices that are ours. And what's working in reverse right now is that these tech companies have economic interests, really. And like the individual interest, the human interest just gets reduced and reduced. You know, one of the things that I think about in this light, you could probably sense it even from this conversation, but like I really like music and movies and stuff like that. And I feel like culture is getting smushed down a particular way where it's like, what, you made a
Yeah,
piece of
I
art? It's
agree.
like, oh, how many views is that going to get? How are you going to monetize that? And I feel like that's getting pounded into an algorithm in a particular way that's very negative. And so if we had data ownership and then let's say like a UBI type thing, and then we could support things that we liked at much higher levels, and then artists would be able to create and thrive instead of right now, I think like that they're going to frankly, have it tougher and tougher. So it would start with data rights, really.
And one of the ways I like to sort of talk about this in my writing or speeches is like think about data as expressive of our relationship, like our relationships with vendors, like the data that I might provide when I buy something or sell something from the 7-Eleven, for example, the data related to our own conversation. We don't want relationships with someone else. Imagine someone else who's constantly spying on you and pumping you with information that makes you at times alienated, lonely, distressed, going crazy a little bit. That sounds like an abusive relationship between two human beings. Why can't we have a similarly balanced relationship with those who are relating with us around our data? I mean, I think it's a really, really important idea.
If I had won the presidency, I would be going to battle for this all the time, and it would have been fun. I would have, sat down with the major tech companies and social media companies in particular and been like, okay, guys, like now we're actually gonna hash this thing out. And the companies would have been unhappy about it on some level, I'm sure, because some of their business model would have to change. But that would be our best hope. One of the things I've realized over this last number of years is that there's like this regulatory power, which at this point, as we've described, I mean, Congress like can't get its act together on all sorts of things. Then there's this executive agency branch power, and then there's just bully pulpit cultural force type stuff. And one of the things I've realized is that the bully pulpit cultural force type stuff actually might be the easiest. You know what I mean? And there's something noxious going on that's asymmetrical in the parties right now, because this bully pulpit cultural force thing is something that Trump specializes in. I'm not sure he's exactly like a legislative genius or anything. But I think that there's a possibility that it could be used by positive. You know who's actually good at it? Bernie was good at it.
Oh, definitely on this particular topic for sure. Just going after it, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. I think Bernie might have just gone after it.
there's something to that populism today. And so I think it's all connected also to these technological issues. So it's like, let's look at the shifting nature of the economy, both domestically and, of course, to a lesser extent globally, because you're really working a lot in the domestic level, in the national level. Okay, we're seeing more and more of what we could call the part-timization of work, the gig economy, right? The so-called fishering of the workplace. That's one phenomenon.
Yep.
Senator Warren, when I interviewed her for my last book, described this as the end of what she called the social contract. I mean, that's like a shout out to like
Locke.
Rousseau, if I'm not mistaken.
Was it
uh,
Rousseau? Was that Locke Rousseau? Maybe they both
Locke or
used it.
Rousseau, or kind of both. Yeah,
Yeah.
I forgot. I published a paper about this, but now I forgot. So we're sort of recognizing that somehow, kind of economic security, guaranteed work, secure work, or let's not even talk about work, secure economic security. I mean, I said that twice, but basically having enough resources that are sufficient to be able to pay for healthcare, education, pension, etc., your family,
A house.
mortgage, mortgage. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
Exactly,
I mean that
exactly.
stuff
And
now
I'm
is
here in
so rough.
California where there's that huge crisis. So it's sort of something has shifted and been taken away. And a lot of it seems to be connected to data. And so I wanted to ask you about what you think data ownership looks like and your different proposals to try to resolve this challenge. Do you think universal basic income is the best approach toward it? Paying people for their data? What about turning these corporations into public utilities? What about even the idea? I know I have lots of ideas. What about the idea even that any sort of corporation that significantly leverages public investment, right? Like our roads, bridges, et cetera, our internet, which was paid for by ARPANET, by our own taxes, starting at UCLA, that the public should own some small equity, maybe a blockchain guaranteed equity into that company. I mean, that's a very progressive idea. Universal basic dividend. What do you think about all these different proposals? Why can't we start making some of these things happen?
Now, the reason why we can't make more of them happen is the diseased political system, and I got into the guts of it. And so here's what breaks my heart. Check it out. I'm running for president. I'm like, hey guys, we should just give everyone $1,000 a month. That would actually be a game changer. And people are like, oh, it's impossible. It would cost, come up with a number, whatever you want. Let's say, sake of argument, it would cost like 2 trillion extra a year, and people would be like, it's impossible. And then COVID hits, and then we issue $5 trillion in stimulus checks. Yes, but cash, that was a very small proportion of the 5 trillion. So if you do rough numbers, $5 trillion divided by the US population is, let's call it 15,000 a head. We could have gotten 15,000 a head. Now most people didn't get that. You got, a small fraction of that, maybe 2,000 would be normal. And the other 13,000 went into city and state governments, went into the financial system, went to major corporates, went to all this stuff, trying to like find things to make it whole. Now, imagine if they'd just been like, hey, guess what? All these institutions, whatever, we're just going to take care of people. And you wouldn't even need to have done it at this max level, but we made this big move, and most people don't understand what we did really. They blame inflation on the stimulus checks. It's like, look, guys, like the stimulus checks were 15% of the 5 trillion. It's like, you want to blame it on the other 85%, ish. It turns out that what I was running on was totally possible. But one of the things that breaks my heart now is like, what's possible in this political environment. It's one reason now grinding away on enhanced child tax credit makes perfect sense to me. It's like, look, let's just get some kids out of poverty and try and pave the way there. But those are the big swings. Things along the lines of what you're describing are where we should be going. I do think that there's something of a path towards data rights, though most Americans, and this is like a confusing argument, but most people are just like, oh, privacy and don't do bad things to me. But at the same time, in real life, like we all just click the button and hope for the best. And it's like, hey, I'm in a hurry and like it's convenient. Let's do the thing. If you could have people understand what's possible in that domain, and even if I had my way and we all had our own data rights, like, trying to make all Americans into like data rights experts is stupid. What I would say is like, look, empower me. By the way, I'm still trying to do this. like empower like a data union to be your agent and champion for this. It's like, don't worry about it. We'll figure this out. And then we'll like go fight for you like a Hollywood agent, but for us who are just running around being like, hey, I've got this data for, this million people. Like, like
It's a
let's get
great
our
idea.
fair
Great
share.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, so those are the sorts of things that I see as the paths to where you're trying to go. I mean, I love the product, the subject of utopias, because when people, again, I was running for president, they're like, oh, it's not possible. I'll be like, look, guys, our economy now has grown, by the way, since I was running. So it's, let's call it 80,000 a head, which is about right, by the way. It's like 425 trillion. Do you think on $80,000 a head you can guarantee everyone 12,000 a month or 12,000 a year? And people do the math on that. They're like, yeah, that's actually totally reasonable. Like at that level, you'd be like, you actually could probably even go higher. So you start taking strides in the direction you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea, Andrew, because actually, it's sort of like a bit of a immaterial or sort of like confusing thing to think about. What does it actually mean for us to own our data in a certain kind of practical sense? Like, I don't even know what a bunch of ones and zeros mean, right? But it's actually, this could be another form of work of the future where we have data experts who are, ensuring that people get properly compensated for their data, or that they can make intelligent decisions like a ledger. Okay, I provide this data, this is the benefit, but it's a transparent ledger, which is the exact opposite of what we see occurring, right? So we can figure out ways to tie benefits to costs, right? And where it can be transparent to everybody. And of course, none of us have the ability or time, and we're all multitasking all the time, to read the fine print. That's not designed at all to ensure, or it doesn't give us any alternatives either, right? So I think this is really interesting that you just explained how inexpensive something like universal basic income would be. And I think this is also very telling at a time where we just witnessed, as I'm sure you noted, on Valentine's Day, the largest strike in history of rideshare workers, of Uber, Lyft, et cetera, drivers in history. I've actually attended, Andrew, rideshare worker strikes in Uganda. And I sort of like asked the question, and I wrote about it in my last book. Like, what does it mean for a gig worker to strike in Uganda relative to a company that's like 8,000 miles away, where there's like not a single employee of that company? They're gig workers, like the people, the drivers, but that company is like totally invisible to those striking workers. So I wonder like what you think about where work is going. Future of work, of course, is this big buzz theme associated with it. But I guess I want to ask that relative to what you just said around universal basic income. And Sam Altman, now we're going to go to AI. Sam Altman, co-founder of OpenAI, kind of the person most tied now to ChatGPT, just made a request, or sort of said it to the public. You might have seen that. We need $7 trillion for 7 trillion, not billion, $7 trillion for a new wave of fast, super powered microchips to make the AI revolution happen. Never mind where those chips come from, the labor associated with it, the environmental issues, it's the energy consumption, all those things, the externalities. But I wonder, as we move more and more to AI systems that use our data and mimic our behavior through stochastic algorithms, I'm wondering like where you think this is all going. We see worker strikes, we see Sam asking for 7 trillion. We see how inexpensive UBI is, and there's this big question of where is work going to head, and where is economic security going to head, and is Sam Altman and these AI tycoons, who I interviewed Sam about his support of UBI for my last book, and wrote about you. So it's like, are they out of touch? Like, how can this be resolved? Like, where is economic security going to head, and how can we get there?
Now, UBI is, in my mind, where we have to be trying to go as quickly as possible, and with the thought that it's a foundation. And so here's the argument that I'd make that I think most people listening to this would agree with. AI is going to do a lot of work, and it's going to make the economy more and more extreme and winner take all. And there are going to be a lot more people looking around being like, okay, my grandparents could like join a company and stay there and like get benefits and a pension. And like now I'm looking around being like, well, that's not really in the cards. And then even if it is in the cards, like the cost of housing shot up, cost of education, like things have gotten very, very out of whack. So the best case scenario is that we do convert to more of an era of abundance, and scarcity has been the rule since essentially the dawn of human civilization, but that is flipping. And even just the numbers I just used is that, can you imagine a society that's producing $80,000 of GDP ahead? I mean, that's us. So if you might be at a point where you can actually take care of most basic things, and then you still need people to have structure, purpose, fulfillment, measurements, and the rest of it. And so this is my big argument, is that if we put ourselves all on a capital efficiency scale, we lose. Like, AI is going to wipe out a lot of us, and then some of us will still be okay, but like, it's arbitrary, more or less. If you take that as a premise, then you say, okay, capital efficiency cannot be the determiner, the determinant factor. And so what then do you start to use as a determinant factor, or at least a co-determinant factor? And what I proposed is, like, you actually adopt human values. And this is what I call the human-centered economy. And I used to use my wife as an example when I was running, say, look, my wife's at home with our son who's autistic. How much does a market value her time at? And people are like thinking about it, like, how much does a market value her time at? Like, zero. But the market is dumb and broken. And so we should all agree that my wife's time is actually, like, very, very well spent if it's being spent with our son. And so you end up developing a multivariate economy, is what I was proposing as a human-centered economy. It's one reason why I loved the experimentation in various currencies, though a lot of that kind of went into the financial speculation, like, no-go zone, honestly. But my vision is that you have a caring economy, you have an arts economy, you have this capital efficiency economy, and then people can operate on different dimensions, and we reward that. Like, so but if we just have one unit of measurement, we're probably screwed.
I'm like so hyped that you just said that, Andrew, because in my own limited way as a former AI developer, like, very different kind of AI, as you know, compared to these AI systems today, which are using patterns, algorithms that are looking for micro patterns and correlation in data. But earlier AI was more cognitivist, more rationalist, more domain specific. But it's like, it's so awesome to recognize that even when we use the term AI, what kind of intelligence are we talking about? Generally, that means deterministic analytical intelligence, not creativity and not care. So, like, doubling down on creativity in an era where machines are mimicking, expression seems like a great thing. And it's interesting to note that, given how we're now seeing all these copyright suits, New York Times, of course, and others.
Yeah, and when I talk about the arts too, it's like right now, it's an example I use. Check it out. So let's say I want to be a musician. And then you're like, oh, like, I have Asian parents. So my Asian parents are like, you're being a rock star is stupid. But then maybe I wind up being a super famous, like, rock star, like, pick your favorite famous musician. And so, like, the market likes Taylor Swift because, she's a billionaire and whatnot, and then this other person who's like, a struggling musician, be like, oh, the market doesn't like that person. But one of the things, if you know creatives, it's like, just making the art is itself the pursuit, and obviously you want people to succeed, to like it and listen to it and quote unquote buy it. But imagine like an economy where there were tons and tons of people making art, making music, and then different people consuming it in different ways. Like, if you let the market do its thing, those artists, like, don't have a way to feed themselves, honestly. But if you had, like, a society where it's like, look, I'm not here to somehow, like, judge your art in terms of, like, this purely commercial dimension all the time. I feel very strongly about this stuff because like, the commercial pressures are going to just smush a lot of human creativity, but the creativity has this intrinsic purpose outside of the marketplace. And even in our limited ways, Ramesh, like, let's say, how many books have you written?
I've written three, thinking about writing a fourth.
Yeah, dude, I'm with you. I've
But
written.
like 100, hundreds of these academic publications, but super frustrated because they always get locked down by paywalls.
Well, yeah, so I've written 3.5 books.
Oh, that's what's up. I got to get to that half there.
Yeah, no, it was a novel that I co-wrote called The Last Election. It's dystopian. It was meant to be kind of like a screenplay, honestly. But like you write something, and I've written 3 books, and they've sold at different levels. And then like, does that correspond necessarily to like how good the book was? It's like maybe, maybe not. You know what I mean? So that's like on a limited dimension. And so I think people instinctively can sense caring economy, and that could be tutoring or mentoring. I mean, that would make our world much, much better. A lot of education, and then creativity. So like, if you had those 3 dimensions, it's like commercial, caring, and creativity, you'd be in much better shape. And I would argue that you could probably think of a fourth or fifth as well.
And it's also paired to different kinds of intelligence. There's creative intelligence, there's emotional intelligence. These are different kinds of intelligences. Intelligence is not merely built around inducing some information out of patterns. That's part of our intelligence, right?
And I'm going to suggest to people who are listening to this or watching this is almost the definition of utopia. Like that, this is like, if people can use their intelligence and energies and talents in a way that they enjoy and does good in the world, and there are millions of people that are able to do that very fruitfully, that's utopia, is it not? Like, in many ways, like that's what we
Absolutely.
have to try and build, is is these alternate dimensions of measuring and rewarding activities. That's not that, so people think like, how sci-fi is this? I mean, we're doing it already. And we so one of the things I say is, look, like, I use 5 currencies in my day-to-day life. There's like Venmo, that there's cash, there's my credit card, but then I've got weird Amex points. I've got like a deli punch card that I'm still trying to get my free sandwich. And so there are things you can do. If I had become president, I was 100% going to throw down on like massive pilots. But that there was like a New England community that does essentially these time points, where it's like, I spent an hour looking after your kids, so then you have to spend an hour, helping me clean my lawn. Like, that's one way. And another is that there's like a local currency in from universities sometimes, that there's like a fundraiser for a school, and it's like, if I do the thing, then I get. So that there are experiments, and we have the technologies to be able to do these things in a much more significant way. Though I'm cool with them being localized and impact. If you imagine, if you just dumped like a certain number of service points in like a town, and, I mean, and then like people were just like doing stuff. I mean, like that. By the way, this is going to become more and more vital as time goes on.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see technology and the digital revolution we're all in the middle of as the foundation for new forms of expression and exchange, or a renewed connection to creativity, a renewed connection to care, where a future is working with machines, knowing what they do and knowing what they don't, right? And kind of putting them in their proper place. Because we always have worked with machines, right? In a sense, when I paint, I don't know if it's a machine, but I'm using a canvas, I'm using the technology of a paintbrush, right? There's lots of different machines. There are even automated machines in the past, industrial machines. Forklifts are a type of automated system, right? Even if you date back centuries, there were different kinds of automata. If you look at like Viennese aristocracy, so it's sort of like understanding what technologies are and aren't, and understanding what humanity is and it is and is not, right? And kind of doubling down on being human, doubling down on being alive.
Yes. And then trying to build an economic system that actually rewards human values. So I laid out this sketch of a human-centered economy, this vision, in The War on Normal People, the book I wrote about automation and UBI. And then I tried to include, it's like, okay, so where should we be trying to go? And it had an idea for a social currency. And then during my presidential campaign, my campaign manager made me swear never to use the words social currency, because he said, look, it's hard enough to get people on board with the magical Asian man from the future who wants to give everyone money, but then when you start talking about another currency, people just turn off. So never do it again. but now I could do it, obviously, happily. But if someone wants to see that vision, it's in a book I wrote called The War on Normal People. And I think at this point there are like cheap copies available for resale, because there are a lot of copies floating around.
I just want to ask you one last kind of obligatory question about regulation and big tech, because I just think you're kind of one of the most important public figures actually talking about and thinking through this stuff. There are a lot of proposals out there, right? There's the break up big tech thing that was like Warren's slogan. Bernie kind of supported it in his own way. We have yet to see any anti-monopoly action taken, antitrust action taken in this nation in decades. As you probably know, Tim Wu's great book, The Master Switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he was in the FTC, as we know. FTC had some good actions. So it's like, so there's sort of like, that's one approach. Another is to think about things like search and social media as public utilities, so they're non-discriminatory, and sort of regulate them accordingly. Another, there are a number of different kinds of things, like even carving out Section 230, which is, gives platforms immunity over content that might be extremely hateful or divisive. Understanding that a platform like a Instagram feed or Twitter feed is not the same as the New York Times, because they can't possibly control for everything placed on there, but the algorithms determine what is visible and viral, right? So there's like several different kinds of proposals. They're floating around. I've put my name and helped staffers, like even Republican and Democratic ones, whatever, on different proposals that are common sense, but it doesn't seem like much has advanced. I know Senator Klobuchar has kind of pushed for privacy bills more than most in the Senate. What do you support in terms of a regulatory action? And what do you think about all this, given concerns around disinformation with the forthcoming elections, which is where I want to take us next to talk about your stands on this coming election?
Yeah, I think this election could be known as the AI election, and not in a good way. I mean, we already had one deep fake audio robocall of the president in New Hampshire, and disincentives are really absent in a lot of cases, because if you don't know who put out the crazy video that gets seen millions of times, I mean, damage is done, and then like who did this? I mean, so that's the danger, which I think is very real. Now, the danger of being real doesn't mean that we can't do everything we can to try and improve on the situation. And one way, people might not like this, and I'm sorry if you don't like this, but I do think it's like a hardware software solution, where if you have a video, it can have a watermark that essentially says, hey, this is done on my iPhone and unaltered. And then people will be like, okay, like that's pretty good, as like a standard. And then if there's a video that doesn't have the watermark, you'd be like, look guys, like no one knows whether the heck this is real or not. I wish those safeguards weren't necessary, but I think they increasingly will be. Unfortunately, right now our regulatory approach is wait until it happens, and then after it. This is the new American regulatory framework. Wait until it happens, have a hearing yelling at someone about it, and then do nothing. That's like the
Absolutely
general approach.
nothing. Absolutely nothing. Make Mark Zuckerberg apologize. It's just a photo op, it seems like.
Yeah, because our political figures now just traffic in their social media virality and the news cycle, in large part, oh my gosh, in large part because they're insulated from any real competition. So I guess I will close this on these numbers. What do you think the approval rating is for U.S. Congress right now?
20%?
Yeah, it's about right. It's like 15%, 20%. And the re-election rate for incumbent members of Congress is 94%. So that they're insulated from any real competitive pressures. So in that environment, what they want is notoriety. And so if they can be shown to be yelling at someone, that's the win. And like, I don't care whether I've actually solved the problem. The problem is immaterial to my political fortunes. And now it's material to our real lives. So, there's that. But so that's what has to change. And the way to change it is by making it so that if people don't deliver for us, they're out. And then if they do deliver, they stay. But right now, them delivering or not delivering is essentially unrelated to whether they stay in office.
Right. It's a great point. The perverse incentive structures is something we've talked about and how to resolve them. So I want to I know we're close to closing this conversation. It's just we're going to have many, I hope, in the future. Andrew, it's always uncanny to me how often you mention things that are right in my mind as well. Or I kind of said the same thing you've said. Like another day, I'm like, maybe brothers from another mother or something here.
We have very similar wavelengths and brainwaves, Ramesh. So grateful for your making me feel sane.
So I want to ask you about this election. Of course, I know that you're supporting Representative Dean Phillips, who is in the Democratic Party, running in the Democratic primary, but it doesn't seem like the Democratic primaries are particularly open, or there are no debates. It's kind of strange. So I just want to ask you about where you see, and of course, this isn't merely a presidential election coming up. There are many, state, local, etc. elections occurring. So where are you seeing all of this heading? Tell us about your advocacy for Representative Phillips or anyone else you'd like. Dr. West, who's running independently. I'm sure maybe you've met him before or you know him. But what about you for this election? We're in the kind of, I don't know, final stretch, but it's coming up.
It's strange. Strange when people talk about the finals. Well, Super Tuesday is a very important day, and that's March 3rd. So I've been supporting Dean Phillips in large part because I don't want Trump to be our president again. And I'm very, very concerned that the Democratic Party should be running the strongest possible nominee against him. I think Joe Biden is maybe the least secure choice to defeat Trump in November. And I don't think the Democrats have done us any kind of service by preventing a real primary competition. They've coronated Joe. They just circled the wagons. It's struck me as irresponsible, frankly. And so I've been glad to make the case for Dean. Dean is a sane, well-intended 55-year-old member of Congress from the Democratic Party who flipped a red district. And he just looks up and says, you know what? I want to defeat Trump. I don't think Joe's the best choice, and I think I'm a better choice. I happen to agree with him. And so I've been campaigning with Dean. Dean also, this is like a soft spot. Dean went to Brown University, which is where I went. we didn't overlap, but it was, one of the
Awesome.
things that put a smile on my face when I sat down with Dean months and months ago. I met him before this cycle, but before he went, actually, this will make you all like him. I met him at a campaign finance reform event where he said, hey, money in politics is killing us. I'm the only member of Congress who doesn't dollar for dollars. I can't find anyone to go to dinner with in DC because everyone has a fundraiser to go to every night. And I think it's disgusting. And I heard this and I said, I like you. So this was before he decided to run. And before he decided to run, he was just trying to get someone else to run because he said, you know what? I don't think Joe's the best candidate against Trump. And the Democratic Party stifled any real competition. So then he felt he had no choice but to step up himself.
So are you sort of actively campaigning with him? And I did notice that Dean Phillips does support Medicare for all. And how are you all sort of dealing with the fact that the DNC is not going to really, they're going to do everything they can to not really give Representative Phillips a chance, or Marianne Williamson, who I like her views as well on lots of different ways, or even Cenk Uygur, my friend from the Young Turks, apparently is running as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, the portrait, I always thought the portrait was going to be very, very bad in terms of them not having debates. They canceled the primaries in Florida and North Carolina, pretty dirty. And so you look at it and you're like, huh. And I will say there's another thing that the DNC doesn't technically control, but they kind of do control, is the media, where and that's related to the debates. But if people, I thought that Dean Phillips, as a sitting member of Congress in the Democratic Party, would get more fair hearing, and that really hasn't been true. And so that was one reason why I thought Dean was the best candidate. And by the way, Dean did get 20% in New Hampshire, and if people understood what they had in Dean, he would do very well.
I think he's pretty impressive, well-spoken. I appreciate that he supports Medicare for all. I would personally take him absolutely 100 out of 100 times over the current president for various reasons.
Looking at the numbers, this is not a good strategy. I mean, just looking at, he's down by 8 in Michigan, down by 8 in Georgia. These are states he won last time. He's down by 9 in North Carolina. He was within 1 last time. It's like last cycle -8. And that maps to the fact that he had a 49% approval rating, or 50 even, in 2020. And then today that's 38. So, but, I mean, I'm an anyone but Trump guy. I just want the best person to be in the field in November. And please do check out Dean Phillips, dean24.com.
I appreciate that. So I think we should close today's conversation. I just want to go back to the big picture. Where's your kind of hope? Like, what's your kind of utopian vision? Here, when we say utopia, is even true to the theme of the podcast, it's not meant as some pipe dream. It's meant to be aspirational. Let's look forward for the name of your party. Let's look at how things are changing and recognize that those changes can be ones that we lead, all of us, the demos, all of us, for a future that we all can believe in, that is one of mutual gain rather than distrust and polarization and suspicion and all these things that have set foot, more and more, partly caused or at least amplified, as you said, by technology. Tell me a little bit about your sort of vision of life in this country, moving forward, like your hope, your goal, your dream of such, and perhaps even more widely about the planet.
Yeah, like I mean, so the U.S. What happens with our leadership is crucial to what happens around the world, and it's one reason why everyone's going to look at our election. I look forward to a time when we can turn the page on this current brand of politics and this current system that really is not centered on us and our families and our communities. I will say, like, I'm a very goal-oriented person, so like I ended up being like, hey, I want to get this child tax credit out of the Senate because I mean, in the meantime, we can make some people less poor. That'd be great. But there are also some things going on in November that I are very high stakes in my world, where there could be as many as 4 states that are voting to get rid of their party primaries this November. And if they get rid of their party primaries, and I know everyone's like about right now, but then you come back 2 or 4 years from now, all of a sudden you'd have maybe 6, 8, 10 US senators who didn't have primaries, which would then make them much, much more reasonable and lucid and public spirited and like not captive. And so those states are Nevada, Colorado, Oregon, maybe Arizona, maybe Montana, maybe Idaho. So I just named 6 states. Not all of them are going to have this vote, and not all of them are doing the full Monty. Like Arizona might do top 2 primary, the California system really. Oregon is doing something more dramatic, but ranked choice voting and nonpartisan primaries are the path to utopia. Now I know that might not click for some people, but they really are. And so I'm looking forward to trying to get some points on the board in November outside of the presidential.
It's fantastic. I mean, what I always love and appreciate about you, and this conversation really showed it, is you got the heart, you got the dreams. You're sort of thinking in a very future centered way, but you're also super practical and pragmatic. All right, here's the low hanging fruit. Here's how we get it done. Here's universal basic income. The pandemic showed us that payments, direct payments, actually support people in highly important life affirming ways. It's just fantastic to be in conversation with you, Andrew. I know you have a busy day, busy month ahead, and here's to continuing to work together and move forward together. Appreciate you very much.
Would love that, man. We'll reconnect until utopia is achieved.
There you go.
The Utopias podcast with Professor Ramesh Srinivasan is produced and edited by me, Phoebe Browse. You can access episodes on all streaming platforms. And if you have questions or comments, please email podcastutopias@gmail.com. That's podcastutopias@gmail.com. See you all next time.